Can you hear me? Testing, testing. Testing. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is MaryAnne Roberto, and we're having a little bit of a technical issue. So you're going to see my screen, but I'm not going to be able to have you guys see me. And I wish I could see all of you. We're going to be waiting just a few more minutes for a few more people to jump in to join us tonight. While we're waiting, I just wanted to, for those of you who don't know me, again, my name is MaryAnne Roberto. I'm a teacher of the visually impaired for almost, I think it's 39 years, something crazy like that. I have been very, very fortunate to train under Dr. Christine Roman-Lantzy starting in 2010 in the Pennsylvania mentorship. And I am a CVI endorsed professional, and I exclusively work with children with CVI. I live in Pennsylvania, and I am currently working at a program at St. Lucy's School for Children with Visual Impairment and a CVI intensive support program, and I consult with other families and teams across the country. So I'm really excited to be here today with all of you. Some of you, I'm sure, I can't really see the screen, but some of you are good friends for many years and colleagues for many years. And I wish we were sitting at a conference someplace or probably this time of night having dinner. But here we are, and hopefully we will all be together again. This is one of our webinar series, the Pediatric Cortical Visual Impairment Society. And we're really happy to be able to bring these special trainings, webinars to our society members. And we really encourage all of you to reach out to other professionals, family members, colleagues to join our society. It's been growing and dynamic, and we're really excited about it. So I'm going to get started with a really important topic of IEPs. It's often the bane of many families' existence, unfortunately, and often also for teachers and professionals. It's doesn't have to be that. It really doesn't. And so I'm going to try to break it down to make us see how to connect the CVI range with the IEP, to talk about the way things go right, the way things go wrong, and to create an IEP that's dynamic and really robust for our children with CVI. The work that I do is based on the work of Dr. Christine Roman-Lantzy. The CVI IEP is directly connected to the CVI range, which was developed by Dr. Roman in 2007. And I have a little bit of a tickle in my throat. I don't have COVID. So pardon my little bit of a cough. Okay, so we're going to really start at the beginning. The CVI range, which was, again, Dr. Roman wrote the book, wrote their CVI range, developed the range in order for our kids with cortical visual impairment to be assessed. But the assessment piece, it does not hang in the air. The CVI range is a very dynamic document, and it needs to be conducted by a competent and experienced professional prior to the IEP. The CVI range is the jumping off point, right? So we don't do this CVI range and set it to the side, have a score, and just walk away from it and kind of, chat about it, right? We use this as a very dynamic piece. It's a tool that is going to help us to generate an IEP that is going to be different than the IEP for a child who has ocular impairment. It's really not the same type of an IEP, and it should look very different. It should stand out as having unique components that meet the needs of the child with CVI. If I am reviewing an IEP, I can tell the difference as many of you who are professionals can tell the difference between an IEP that's written using the CVI range and one that is very generic for a child with ocular impairment. Writing that generic IEP is not going to meet the needs of our children. Just as if you have a child who has an ocular impairment and has low vision, but you write the IEP as though that child is blind, completely ocular blind, that's not meeting that child's needs. And so we need to be specific, and we need to be really honing in on the things that are necessary for our kids. So the CVI principles that Dr. Roman wrote in her first book and repeats in her second book have been for me always my guiding light when it comes to CVI. So when I looked at and think about the IEP, I really use those CVI principles and keep them in mind. So the principle of precision. We use the CVI range score is used to determine our goals and set up the progress for the child. If you don't have a valid and current CVI range score, you're not going to be able to be precise in your work. You're not going to be able to be precise in your writing of goals and setting up a program for a child. Reciprocity principle. The goals need to be updated to reflect the changes in the child's functional vision. So if a goal is written, and this unfortunately does happen, and we'll look at it in things that go wrong. I have reviewed IEPs where the goals are exactly the same year after year, maybe 3 to 4 years or longer. Well, that's not taking into mind the CVI principle of reciprocity. We really need to be watching the child, seeing what the child is doing, and then adapting and adjusting our goals, adapting and adjusting our interventions accordingly. The principle of intentionality, our goals and SDIs, and I use an acronym SDI, we'll look at that a little closer later, as specially designed instruction. That's what we use in Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from. Other states use different terminology, maybe accommodations, it may be special considerations. So we're talking about specially designed instruction. If it's different for your state, kind of think of it in your own terms. So our goals and SDIs are written with the child's CVI range score in mind and not generically. So I have to be intentional in writing the goals. I have to be intentional in putting in what is going to be a specially designed instruction. Using a black background or using red for color can be very intentional and can be very specific to the child. But if you're just writing it because you think it's a CVI thing, that's not intentional. Okay, so you really have to be intentional in what you're doing, and you have to know what that child's CVI range score is in order to adjust the intention of what you need to do. The expectation of change is where we look at, in the principles, we're looking at the attention to the, or we're looking at expecting change in the child's functional vision. And when we think about the IEP, we want to write our goals to build in progress in order to see measurable change in the child's CVI range score and the child's functional vision. So we don't want to just, again, thinking about some of the children whose goals are continuously the same year after year. No one is expecting that child's functional vision to improve. And that's not serving that child well. The attention to the total environment where our CVI IEP is concerned, that's when we really want to be looking at the specially designed instruction that targets each characteristic across the child's day and according to the child's activities. And we'll look at the schedule a little bit, the CVI schedule. All right, so when we are doing the IEP, We want to consider the child's phase, right? What is the phase that the child's in? Phase 1, we know the child is building visual behaviors. This phase should be the shortest duration. And I say shortest, I'm not giving a time frame, okay? I'm not giving a time frame because each child and situation is different. However, there are many, many children who are in phase 1. And again, going back to the principle of expectation of change, no one is really expecting a lot of change. Perhaps that child has more complex needs, and so looks as if, or everyone assumes that there's not a lot of potential for the change to happen, or they think there's not a lot of potential. So they really stay in that phase for a long time, and it's not necessarily about that child. It really is about what everyone else is doing around that child. So I think that's an important piece to understand. If a child is in phase 1 for a really long time, that needs to be looked at significantly. And I know I've evaluated children who are in phase 1 and have been in phase 1 really for too long. So let's move them quickly out of phase 1 and move them into phase 2. With phase 2, our children are using vision for function. There is a lot to do in phase 2, a lot to do. Children begin phase 2 beginning to use vision for function, beginning to use eye to object. It's not very stable. Their skills are very fragile. They are easily moved back into phase 1 when things are too complex. Okay, so in the early stages of phase 2, there's a lot of work that has to happen and a lot of environmental control, lots and lots of things. A lot of the characteristics are really still pretty obvious as in phase 1. But then as that child moves into mid phase 2 and then into the upper phase 2, they begin to do more, right? Lots of things are happening, which means we have to be in there on pay a lot of attention to what's going on. We need to be able to have that principle of reciprocity, see how we're doing, how's that child doing, right? But all the while have that expectation of change. And that all of these things really come into play when you're thinking about the IEP. Because as we know with the IEP, it's an entire year, right? Technically speaking. And technically, if you need to call an IEP meeting because things are like wonderfully moving along and the child is making progress, well, then that's fine. We do that, right? That's not, we don't have to wait the entire year, but there really are a lot of things to do within a child's program. In phase 3, we're now in the refinement of those characteristics, but there is a lot still going on with the child. The child is doing more in their day-to-day life, right? In their day-to-day world. And they need more support and not less. This is a significant piece of an IEP. When this student is in phase 3, we do tend to have people want to just brush their hands. Services are looked at as, well, he's doing so well, she's doing so well, we're doing right. And now that child still needs the support. Remember that what happens is their world expands as they are doing better, right? Their world is expanding as they are learning to use their vision. And that means they need more help to be sure that those fragile skills get strengthened. And it's significantly important that if you're a professional, you do not leave those kids as you're monitoring on your caseload. Wow, she's doing terrific. I don't need that, look at how well she does and she's out in the playground. she's doing this, she's doing, I'm good, I don't have to be there. Please don't do that. You need to be this investigative reporter that, I have this saying in when I was an early intervention specialist, and I would say, I'm always happy, but I'm never satisfied, because there was always something else that had to be done, no matter what just the child just achieved. There's always the next thing, and I always had to look for that next thing. So I really want the professionals to do that. And if you're a parent, you need to expect that. It's tricky. Caseloads are, time and caseloads are issues we can't even get into, but just know that that's a big issue, that a big consideration. Okay, so with the CVI range and the IEP, rating 1 is and we're going to look at a rating 1 so that we can kind of flesh out how we interpret it with the IEP. Any statements that are marked a plus are recorded in present levels, okay? Any of the statements, when you have a plus, that is what the child is doing. That's the now, right? Right now, this is what the child is doing. When I write present levels, I take the statements from rating 1 and I will write that statement, right into my present levels. It's one of the reasons why I think sometimes the range is lost as from a professional perspective. It's like, here it is, it's right here in front of you. All the information you need for your IEP, for your report, is sitting right here in front of you in your CVI range. So use it, right? Dr. Roman didn't do this work for nothing. It's really all so important, and it's all right there. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. I don't have to embellish my language and what, like, it's sitting there. That information is important. The other piece of it is that when I talk about, when I was saying about reviewing IEPs, one thing I can do, if I'm reading a report from a teacher of the visually impaired for a child with CVI, I will often read the report before I look at the CVI range and look at the score. If the score, I should be able to read this report and then go to a CVI range rating guide, and I should be able to generally, see where the pluses are, where the R's are, where the plus minuses and minus are, based on the information that this teacher is given, like generally, not specifically, but generally. And often what happens is I will read a present level that is accurate for the child, but then the score does not reflect that. And your score and your present levels need to be in sync. They need to mirror so that it is very clear from your report what this child is doing, okay? So statements that are marked an R are recorded in the narrative, and they're used to indicate progress. If the R, I like if the R, let's say, for example, the child was scored recently, was resolved one of the statements. That's a really nice thing to put into a report for a parent. It's like, wow, we really worked hard on this. It was a plus. It is now an R. This is terrific. If the child is scoring 5 on the range, you're going to have R's in the 1-2 box that you don't have to report on all of that, right? That's been resolved for a bit. But it's more of the current things. The statements that are marked a plus, minus, and a minus are used to generate those new goals. This is where our expectation of change happens. The idea is that I want the plus, minuses, and minuses to become pluses and to become R's. The expectation of change is in there. That principle is in there for a reason. And we don't want to stagnate. We don't want the kids to stagnate. When they are not making progress, it's often us. It's not often them. So we are the ones who are responsible for that progress. So rating 2 is used to generate our specially designed instructions that we were talking about. So each of the characteristics that is not scored a 1 needs a specially designed instruction written for it. So remember that they have to be specific and not generic, and based on the CVI range score. So an example that I had said before would be, um, you know, we would use all black backgrounds. Well, the child may not need all black backgrounds. If the child's in phase one, absolutely that is something that you're going to be needing to really control the environment. The environmental control is going to be significant for a child in phase one. You're not going to need that environmental control as much for a child who's in high phase two. However, and in phase three, let's say, this is why it's specific. And I'll give you a concrete example. I work with a student who's in 8th grade who is in phase three, and we are adapting his material, his academic material. Technically speaking, he doesn't need black backgrounds for everything. However, when we are adapting his, let's say, his algebra on Google Docs, I use a black background in order to help him with visual fatigue. So the black background, white um, uh, print, right? And highlighting, yellow or red highlighting for, parentheses or plus sign or whatever, that helps him. So technically speaking, he doesn't need all black backgrounds, and he really doesn't. But in that situation, I am having an attention to the total environment, knowing that the work and the visual work for him is more difficult. I will use a black background, but it cannot generically say that he needs black backgrounds. So it is specific to him, and it's specific to where he is on the range. And that's why it's so important to get the SDIs right using the rating 2. So this is an example from Dr. Roman's book. Excuse me. And so you can see that this student has some R's, pluses, plus minuses, okay? Let me see if I feel like I missed one. Okay, and this is the second part of that. So that we can show a few, this is going into rating 5, 6, so that we can show a few of the minuses to show that that was the ceiling. This is where we are with this child, okay? Now I'm going to use that information that I have from the CVI range to interpret what I need to do for my IEP. All right, so I pulled out my R statements, and these statements are going to be information about the child that were true in the past. Again, this is where you decide if you're going to be using it or not, right? If you need to use it, but it's important to know that these statements are a part of what has been happening with the child, may or may not need to be recorded. It just kind of depends on your situation. Now my plus statements are the statements that are recorded under the present levels of visual functioning. If you're a parent and your child's IEP is a little bit more vague, a little bit more generic, I would really encourage the teacher of the visually impaired, to record this in the records. It's really important. The other thing I should note is that the child's CVI range score should be recorded in the present levels under vision. There are some people who would prefer that not be the case. In my own state of Pennsylvania, they are encouraging teachers not to write the range score. And I don't agree with that at all. And I have voiced my strong opinion against that. The reason for that is that, again, from a transparency perspective, from everyone understanding what they're doing for that child, it's really important that we have that number. It was said that they didn't want the number to follow the child through their educational career. my point was, well, then they don't understand the CVI range. And if that number is following that child year after year, then something is wrong and they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So that really is an indication, that something needs to change. So definitely, if you're a teacher of the visually impaired, record the range score. If you're a parent, please insist that the range score be recorded. It's very, very important. Okay, so now we have our plus, minus, and minus statements. And the idea is that you want to work intentionally. And there's but there is the principle of intentionality. We want to work to have these statements at the next time the child is scored on the CVI range. We want them to be scored a plus, or if the minuses are scored a plus minus, we're still looking at expectation of change. We're looking at improvement. We're looking at changes in their functional vision. So that's the point, right? The point is not, again, that we just have these little check marks and we have this nice boxes and we have this nice little package of an assessment. We have to do something with it, right? It has to be dynamic, and we have to be able to see that something else is going to happen with just these numbers. Okay. CVI goals are often the bane of everyone's existence for teachers of the visually impaired. They shouldn't be, really. They do take work. It's not just quick and easy, but because you have to think about it, all right? So we know that it should be connected specifically to the CVI range score. There's my precision. They should have strong CVI language. That's also precision. You want to be specific. You want to be precise. They should be written with progress in mind, which is the expectation of change principle. And they need to be updated as the child makes progress. There's the reciprocity. Again, I think about the kids who are just sitting there year after year, and everyone, and they're doing pinwheels and pom-poms. And we need to do better, right? We definitely need to do better. And those kids are waiting to make progress. So we need to do that. Okay. So with rating 2, especially design instruction needs to be specific, as we talked about, to the child. The accommodations should relate directly to CVI range and the CVI phase, which we talked about as well. Again, if someone was to pick up an IEP that you wrote for a child with CVI, will they be able to see that is specific for, like if I go into an SDIs for a child with CVI and I look and see that they're, more ocular related, and if I see that it's just has to do with red or yellow or maybe, black backgrounds, but it doesn't have latency built in, it doesn't have, opportunities for distance vision to be worked on, and novelty, complexity, all of the pieces of the 10 characteristics. Those 10 characteristics have to be addressed in the special design instruction. The only time, the one characteristic that we don't write a special design instruction for are reflexes, because that's not something we can work on. But so you really have to have the minimum of 9 vision related specially designed instruction, and you can't skimp on that. That has to happen. And you might also have a multiple, you may have a few specially designed instructions for color, for example. You may have a few specially designed instructions for complexity. I could see easily complexity and novelty. You could have, depending on the child's curriculum, depending on what they're doing. So it doesn't have to be just, quick, write a let me just write a color accommodation. Nope. It's how does this child use color? How does color affect this child's ability to use their vision? How can I get them to use their vision with color as a support? And at the same time, how am I expecting the the change in their functional vision so that I'm not just saying everything's going to be red, right? Or all of their highlighting will be red, or all of their, you know, backgrounds are going to be black. Like, I need to figure that in. The rest of the team will not have that mindset, and that's important. You have to be the person who takes the template of those specially designed instruction, and you then cross over everyone's work. You look at how the PT is working with this child, how the speech therapist is working with this child. To me, one of the best things that I love to do is work with other team members. And one of the reasons why I love it is because I do not need to be stepping on their toes. I don't need to be telling them what to do, right? Because nobody wants that. They don't want this vision teacher to come in and say, you should do this and you should do that. Professionally, that gets a little tricky. Instead, I say to them, what are you doing? What are your goals? What are you thinking about for this student? Then I step in and help them with these specially designed instructions to support what they're doing. And if I'm able to support what they're doing with my student using their vision, it's a win-win. 100% it's a win-win. But I also have to step back because I'm not a speech therapist, and I'm happy that I'm not, right? And I'm happy that I'm not a PT and OT. I love the PTs and OT speech therapists that I work with, that I don't need to do their job for them, but I do want to support their ability to help my student to develop their vision. The specially designed instructions should be based on the child's curriculum and the total day. And they're also used to help to create the CVI schedule. We'll talk a little bit about curriculum, but one of the things that I feel like is the most important piece is that both the goals and the specially designed instruction are related to the curriculum. Whatever that child is doing, right, in that day, in that curriculum. If I have a completely, and this goes with the CVI schedule as well, I may have all these great ideas about what this child needs to do, but the teacher next week is working on whales, right? And so I want that child's their work to be around that, right? Around that curriculum. So I'm going to base my special design instruction, my general principles of the special design instruction, and I'm going to put that into place for that child's specific curriculum. Again, this is the intentionality. I do want to make sure that I'm intentionally giving this child the support for that curriculum to give them the ability to learn. Um, it's a really important piece of it. And I want to talk about curriculum a little bit more. The learning media assessment, I'm just going to quickly talk about. I know Dr. Roman and Matt Tejan have been doing a few different webinars on learning media assessment. The learning media assessment is usually required for an IEP, and it's put um, into as part of the assessment. The typical learning media assessments are not always appropriate for our kids with CVI, and they are one tool. But there's a new Dr. Roman and Matt Tejan have published the sensory balance approach, which is an excellent framework, and it's an optional framework for our kids with CVI. What the sensory balance approach does is it really targets where that child is, but again, we go into the expectation of change, and it allows the building of the visual skills, right? So that the child, because if a child in phase 1 is assessed with the learning media assessment, they are going to be a very, very tactile or auditory learners. From the vision perspective, that looks like the child who would need to have Braille instruction. But for many of us who have been working with children with CVI for years and years, we know that those same children can and will become visual learners who then would not be assessed later at any way as needing Braille. So if you're a professional and you're not aware of the sensory balance approach, definitely look at it. It's available through Perkins. It's really reasonable and easy to administer. Definitely add that into your repertoire. This is a quick, just a snapshot of a CVI schedule. The CVI schedule should be completed after the IEP is written and after, obviously, so the CVI range, the IEP is written, and then the CVI schedule. The CVI schedule is not a part of the IEP documents. It can be put in as an addendum. And the reason for that is that it is dynamic. It might change over a week or two. I mean, a few weeks or a month or so, depending on the kids. So I use a Google Doc for a CVI schedule. You put the student's name, their CVI range score, the date. You can do the date that you generated it. The daily schedule you put in, it could be, morning meeting. It could be social studies, whatever it is that is your daily time. And then the CVI characteristics. Typically what I do is I list all of them and I will highlight the ones that we're specifically targeting for the accommodations. So I look at my SDIs, the accommodations, adaptations that I have in my IEP, and I'm really going to be plugging them right in here into that third column. And I will, so let's say, for example, color, and I'll use the example from my student with algebra. And so color is used, red and yellow are used to anchor student to mathematical operations, such as parentheses, addition, subtraction signs. The other thing I like to do, and the reason I like to use the Google Docs, is that I will just, in this square, I will plug in a link to, so if this daily schedule activity was algebra class, I would plug my link of this for the, let's say, the algebra assignment. I can put it right in there in this place, so that anyone else who's sharing the Google Doc with me for the CVI schedule would have access to take a look at it. That's especially helpful if you have anyone, if you're fortunate to have someone who can help you with materials adaptation, then people can kind of get an idea of a template for what they might need to use. You can use that place also for books that you're adapting, and Google Docs books, or a variety of other things. Then everyone on the team should be shared on this document, including the parents. Make sure the parents are a part of your sharing, because a lot of input from parents. Parents are the experts for their children. That goes without saying. And it really helps to develop a dynamic relationship with families. And it's helpful for families to see what's going on. I think one of the things about the COVID lockdowns, which has been helpful for our families with all of the issues that, our kids have had to face. But a lot of families, it's been really nice because they have to be a part of everything that's going on with the kids with their programming. And so that should be a very positive thing. All right. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about things that are getting things wrong, right? Getting it wrong. I don't like to focus on the negative, but really we need to think about the things that go wrong so that we know how to make it right. One of the big issues is that CVI adaptations are associated with vision time rather than an approach that spans the day. And that's important. The time the vision teacher is there should not be the only time your child is is using their vision. And it's one of the reasons why Writing goals, having CVI language, and we'll talk about that CVI language in all areas is so important. It's not just the vision teacher, to doing what the child needs. It is the PT, OT, classroom teacher, the assistant. Everyone is on knowing what needs to happen for the child's vision. Another thing that goes wrong is when CVI approaches are vague and very random, rather than being derived precisely from a CVI range score. So I keep hammering in on the score, and there's a good reason why. We don't want things to be vague. We want it to be precise. There's that CVI principle of precision. An environment that rarely provides sensory support needed for the student to use their vision. So that would be especially for kids who, especially if they're in phase 1 and they're in a very complex setting, if they don't have opportunities to develop their visual skills, and then they continuously rely on their hearing or their tactile, so that they're not giving we're not giving that support to the total environment, the attention to the total environment, to give them those opportunities to use their vision. It doesn't mean the classrooms have to be dark all day. It doesn't mean that they can't have, they're not going to be sitting at the lunch table with the other kids and all of those things, and having birthday parties with the other kids. Hopefully the kids are back in school now, so that's hopefully all of those things are at least beginning to come back. But you really want to pay attention to that environment. And adaptations can happen even in the most complex environments. It's possible to do it. So it can't be used as an excuse. One of the issues that we see is that vision providers use an approach that is rooted in principles of ocular visual impairment, and the language reflects that. So our IEP language reflects it. So we're going to talk a little bit about the CVI language, but pay attention to the pieces in that IEP and how the professionals are addressing the kids, right? Really pay attention to how they're using that language. Another issue is of getting it wrong is CVI range evaluators who may not be testing reliably, right? So they're not conducting the CVI range score reliably. Again, I remember a situation where a family shared with me the child's CVI range score and then the report from the teacher. And the report from the teacher, from that report, I would have estimated that the child was about a 4.5, 5 on the range. And yet the teacher scored that child an 8. So that was a significant difference. Those were basically 2 different children that this teacher, was thinking about. And yet there was one child who was there. And so there was a lot of confusion. The child was not making progress. And interestingly enough, the information the teacher wrote was more reliable than the score the teacher, and it was a vision teacher, the score the vision teacher gave. So the present levels and the information was accurate for the child, but the teacher scored it way, way too high. Another thing that happens is teachers are not given time to adapt materials. Material adaptation is crucial. There are many issues with the amount of service. We can't even begin to get into those things. I will tell you, doing a curriculum for an 8th grade student, it is significant amount of time that is needed. But I'm not sure what those solutions are, but that I will tell you that the material adaptation is very, very important. 2 pieces I think that are very important to think about is that our kids are not taught to their academic abilities. Really, really crucially important. There are low expectations of improvement, and we need to look at these IEPs and we need to see that they're not reflecting. They're just not reflecting that our kids have the ability to learn, their ability for literacy. I consult with a number of families, and I am personally shocked at how many programs do not have any literacy programming for our kids. And they're not just kids with cortical visual impairment, they're kids with a variety of other issues and special needs, but there really is very little academic programming and very low expectations for their improvement. So I significantly believe that needs to change. Oh, okay, now we're going to talk about getting it right, because this is what we want to do from here on out. We want to get it right. And I do want to say everyone gets it wrong, right? All the providers, all teachers of visually impaired, anyone who's out there, we have all gotten it wrong. We might get it wrong tomorrow. But as Dr. Roman always quotes Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better. And so you might get it wrong, but you have to know that you got it wrong and you have to change it and fix it. That's really, really important. None of us is perfect. We are all in need of improvement, but our kids need us to get it right. And that's really my goal, is that more people get it right as we learn and as we struggle. So that part of it is just, the humility of knowing you might get it wrong and then you mess up and you try to figure it out, I think is a really important piece. So getting it right is when a CVI range is conducted by a person, preferably who's CVI endorsed or has significant training and experience. One of the ways, if you are learning, is to score, do a range with a colleague and score with each other, and then don't tell each other the score, and then go over the scores and see if you guys are, if you have similar scores and you're within validity. That's really, really a helpful thing. An IEP with strong CVI language is getting it right, and CVI language that's built into every goal, not just vision goals, so that the vision teacher has vision goals, but that the OT, PT, speech therapist, and the classroom teacher, special ed teacher, everyone who has a goal for that child has vision built in. That's, again, the attention to the total environment, right, is also the attention to the child's entire day and their entire curriculum. Really push that. It takes some tweaking, it takes some collaboration, but it works and it's really helpful. Be careful of words like tracking and contrast. And tracking is an issue that you often see. The good thing about tracking is, as an early intervention evaluator, the team members who are looking for a child to track will often send a child with CVI to a vision person because they're not tracking. We're not looking at tracking as a goal. Tracking is a skill that's very difficult for our children with CVI. It's really not something we need to worry about, but don't have that in the IEP. Make sure that's not in. Contrast is another one that you have to be careful. When you use contrast, so let's say in your specially designed instruction, you say, we want, be sure to use contrast between backgrounds and materials. Well, that means something completely different to many people, because if I have a child who has a preferred color of red and, and a strong preference for yellow, and a teacher puts a red fire engine on a yellow background, the child is not necessarily going to be able, especially depending on the phase, especially in phase 1, to disembed the background from that object. So instead of contrast, you want to have complexity, right? So reduce the complexity by using a background. Use color to anchor, use color to highlight, use color to, elicit visual attention. They are different words. Those are the strong language words you're going to be looking for. You want to see comparative language. You want to see salient features. You want to see eye to object. You want to see words that involve complexity and words that involve novelty. Getting it right is an SDI that is written for each characteristic that is not resolved. Again, knowing without using the reflex characteristic, and also not limiting yourself. Really being thoughtful to whether or not the SDIs, as specific as you need to be, right? As precise as you need to be with the SDIs. A CVI schedule that is established, shared with team members, and dynamic. It should change as needed. It should change with the child's needs, and it definitely should be shared with others. Ongoing and intensive team training is really an important piece. It doesn't always happen. It should happen, right? The team members need the training. It's really an important piece. When I have it usually in the beginning of the school year, I have a training for team members, and I'm always I try to have the family members there as well. It's important for them to be a part of it, to really have the connection to what's going on with their child. A CVI Range endorsed professional is able to lead the team and monitor adaptations regularly. Not always a possibility, but it really helps, and that's one way of getting it right. So we want to look at environmental adaptations that work to match the complexity of the environment and the complexity of the task. This is, again, our friend Matt Tejan, his What's the Complexity framework, really helpful in putting into play what we need from our IEP, the SDIs, and then making that happen within the child's framework. Adequate time to provide is provided to adapt materials for the student. Big issue, but very important. The student needs to be provided with appropriate support, such as an iPad. Really, really, many of our children do need iPads. It is, as Dr. Roman said, it's like the near perfect learning tool. So we really should have that as well. The accessibility of the total environment, including educational curriculum and literacy. Please push for literacy instruction for your kids. If they're not already, if they don't already have that in their curriculum, it's often not in there, and it's very disappointing. And it's very, very doable for our kids, and it should be. Every child should learn, should have literacy in their programming to meet their needs. So, and making sure that their IEP connects them to their curriculum. So we're going to almost finished here. And just assuming competence, it's another piece I think that's important. If you don't have a team who assumes competence for your child, or if you're a teacher, you're not sure about that competence piece, it's go back to that CVI range and go back and see what needs to happen. Look at those plus minuses and minuses, and that's your focus. That's where your goals are going to be around those statements to really increase the child's functional vision. One-on-one teaching when necessary and when you need to for the kids. Opportunities for inclusion if that's appropriate for our kids. Pre-teaching of salient features. That's goes into, all of us know that if we're working with our kids, that is an SDI that we put in under our novelty characteristic. Comparative language as well. And intensive training of instructional assistants as much as possible. The instructional assistants are usually right there with our kids all day. And some of my best teachers / coaches for my kids are instructional assistants. So we are going to wrap this up. And I wanted to let you know that we're going to do a follow-up webinar. We decided not to do questions and answers tonight or polls. There's a lot of information that I really wanted to put out there. And what we would like to do is have you send questions that you have. These can be family member questions and or professional questions. We are not really going to be answering specific questions for each, for individual kids. It's too hard to do that. We're not a part of your IEP team, so it's not the point for the questions that we want to answer. But generic kinds of questions that you want to get more information about the IEP, more information about using the CVI range with the IEP, and things that we can all learn from. So as a group, what are your questions about IEPs? What are your struggles with IEPs? How are things going right with IEPs, right? So does someone have the perfect way that it all works together? I think that's an important piece, but we did want to follow up so that we have somewhat of a back and forth. with all of you, since we can't really do that in this format. And you can send it to my email, which is envisioncvi@gmail.com. And if you can, in the email, make IEP questions as the subject, that will be helpful for me to sort them. And we're going to be going over we'll go over these questions on October the 20th at 6:30, again in this format. And we do want to make sure that the questions that we're answering, again, are going to be general questions that can help the whole group. If you have specific questions, this wouldn't be the place to ask them. But I just want to thank all of you for coming tonight. I know everyone is super busy, and this is a witching hour for many people and families. But as always, it's wonderful to be with all of you, when I have quotes around the with. But thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you on October 20th. And again, please share these webinars with other friends, families, colleagues, so we can get more and more people who would be interested in the Pediatric Cortical Visual Impairment Society. I hope everyone is safe and happy and well, and I really look forward to seeing everyone in person very soon. Take care.